Welcome to the American Shoulder and Elbow Surgeons Podcast. I'm your host, Peter Chalmers, a shoulder and elbow surgeon at the University of Utah in Salt Lake City, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Brian Waterman, a sports and shoulder surgeon at Wake Forest in North Carolina. Brian, how are you?
I'm doing well, Peter. Good evening.
Before we get started, I should mention the views expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect the views of the American Shoulder and Elbow Surgeons Society, the University of Utah, Wake Forest University, or the institutions of any of our guests. Okay, so today we have the great honor of welcoming Dr. Bill Mallon on the podcast. Bill comes to join us as he steps down from his position as editor-in-chief for the Journal of Shoulder and Elbow Surgery. Bill has made enormous contributions to society, serving in nearly every role, including president, and has now served as editor-in-chief for 16 years, a truly historic run at the helm of what is clearly our most important literature source within our field. The role of editor-in-chief is a thankless, never-ending job that is critical for our collective knowledge base. So, Bill, for everyone in our field, thank you for everything you've done.
Well, thank you, Peter. I appreciate it. It was actually an honor for me to do it.
So tell us, 16, 17 years ago, how did it come about that you became editor-in-chief? Is there a story there?
Well, I was an associate editor under Bob Neviser starting in 2003. And then when he decided to step down, I decided to apply for the position of editor-in-chief. And there were interviews were done at the Academy meeting. It was in San Francisco. I remember it was a very small little conference room up in some out-of-the-way hotel. It wasn't at the main hotel or the main conference center. And there were three of us that interviewed, and they selected me for some reason.
Yeah, Bill, fast forward then, we've seen a lot of remarkable triumphs for the journal, a lot of ways in which it's grown, and you look at the current iteration, and what it looks like now is much different. Tell us about the transition from a single journal to now what we would call a family of journals. How did that come about? And what was the impetus there? What do you think are the benefits and challenges?
Well, that part of that was my idea. Part of it was Elsevier's idea to start the second journal, at least, and the third and fourth were my ideas. And the reason is when I took over the year before I was editor, Bob Neviser had 480 submissions to the journal, and we now get about 1,800 per year to JSES, and that was happening around 2017, 18. Actually, our biggest year ever was 2020 during the pandemic because nobody had any clinical responsibility, so the residents just wrote papers. And it had dawned on me that we were rejecting a lot of good papers. Our contract with Elsevier only gave us a certain number of pages we could use, and we couldn't publish some reasonably good papers. And the problem for that in a journal like Shoulder and Elbow Surgery, it's a highly subspecialized journal, and it's kind of an end stage journal, I used to call it, because I would get people when I rejected their papers who would email me and say, what do I do with this paper? The only place it'll really be published, should really be published, is in Journal of Shoulder and Elbow Surgery. And they were right, but I didn't have room to publish it. So I felt like we needed an outlet for good papers that we just didn't have room to publish. And that's when, I decided that we should start the other journals, and Elsevier was all over it, especially with the first one. The next two, I sort of had to convince them, but they went along with it.
Now, hidden in that story was that part of the contract was Elsevier would only publish a certain number of pages. And I think many young listeners will be so confused by everything you just said because they've never seen the print journal. They only see it published online. So tell us a little bit about, has that changed publication rates? Like how does the switch most of us have made from print to electronic with our literature changed the way that the journal functions?
Well, the big journal, JSES, is published both print and digitally. And one of the other journals, Seminars in Arthroplasty, also has a print edition too. But the other two journals, JSES International and Reviews, Reports, and Techniques, both publish only digitally. And I remember starting to ask Elsevier back as far long ago as 2010, I said, when are we going to go to just an all digital journal? And their answer was always that it depends on the advertisers. As long as the advertisers thought they were getting more bang for their buck from print edition advertising, they still wanted print journals. And so because of that, we've continued to have print journals. It really relates to the advertising dollars that are a big part of our income each year for the journal.
So I think that's a very interesting thing to follow up on. Because as I'm sure everyone knows, the journal, it gets money from advertisers, it gets money from subscribers. There's two income sources. And then where, I wanted to give you a chance to talk about this because I know it's been a big thing. Where does that money go? Like, what happens to the income from the Journal of Shoulder and Elbow Surgery?
A lot of it goes to paying editorial salaries. My own, I have a managing editor, a great woman named Jill Shepard, who helped us so much. We have now, with 4 journals, we have a deputy managing editor as well for 2 of the other journals. That's actually Jed Kuhn's daughter. And then we have, for the big journal, we have about 20 associate editors. And then there are publishing costs for Elsevier, so they keep a percentage of all the money that comes in. And, that's in our contract. We're now, I think, in the 5th year of our 7-year contract with them. And that spells out like how our royalty comes out of the income after a certain amount goes to Elsevier. And, it's all set up in the contract initially.
But what I wanted to tell is that my understanding from you is that there's usually extra money, and that money's going to the foundation. Is that correct?
Yeah. What JSES and now ASES has gotten out of the journal over the years, we've always been in the black. Under Bob Neviser, we never lost money, and under my tenure, we made money every year. And actually, during my tenure, we've made enough money that we gave $2 million to the ASES Foundation to help fund research and education. And we continue to be in the black and continue to have a corpus of funds, even despite giving that much away. And the way the money is managed has changed a little bit in the last 3-4 years, ever since the Academy kind of divested themselves of subspecialty groups. We're more independent now, and now JSES funds directly go to ASES. But ASES loves it because we're making money for them every year, and that helps fund their operation as well.
Yeah, Bill, I mean, in terms of accomplishments, it's incredible to maintain in the black. For all those years, publishing is getting tough, right? Print and advertisement dollars are definitely strained. I'm curious, do you have any bold predictions on when this might transition to online only? Is that in the cards? Do you see that on the horizon?
I think it'll eventually transition to online only, but I bet you it's still at least 10 years away, Brian, just because of what we said about the fact that the advertisers still want print advertising. They get a better return on their investment that way. But eventually to override it. I mean, you guys know this, both of you in academic positions, the medical students and the residents read everything online now. They probably don't even know how to read a paper journal. You'd have to explain it to them, I think, but we'll get there eventually.
Well, one of the other things that Peter and I have talked about is just how open access has really changed the game as well. It's altered the publishing model, and I think it's created more equity and access. Traditionally, we've certainly seen the difficulties in accessing some of these papers that are behind a paywall through a library or an additional source. Is this an overall positive for the literature, or do you have a different take?
I don't know if I have a different take. I may not just be quite as positive about it as you are, Brian. Certainly, we're going to go to open access more and more. As a matter of fact, when you talk to the publishers, and I have meetings with the publishers all the time, they tell you can't start a non-open access journal anymore. It's just not possible to do that. There's actually the impetus for this started in Europe, especially Britain, with a thing called Project S, in which they've mandated that anything that is funded from a certain funding agency, in the U.S. it would be the NIH or the Wellcome Trust or anything like that. Anything funded by something like that has to be published in open access. And we get only about 5% of our papers at Journal of Shoulder and Elbow Surgery funded from those sources. So we're able to publish those open access, even though we're in a print journal with subscriptions. This is what's called a hybrid model of the journal. And if someone has to be open access, we allow that article to be accessed by anybody, even without a subscription. But I think we'll go more and more towards open access in the future. People have to understand publishers have to make money too. I mean, you might not like subscriptions and you might like publishers, but if they don't make money, they go out of business. And if they go out of business, who's going to publish journals for us? So that's why I'm probably not quite as positive as you are on it, but I do think it's going to go more and more open access in the future.
Bill, can I follow up with you on that? So maybe explain to the listeners, why does open access mean that publishers wouldn't exist? Don't you still need a publisher even if you have open access, or do you think open access means that the publisher is completely taken out of the whole process?
No, the publisher is not taken out of the process, but the publishers don't make as much money usually from open access as they do now. And the problem is if they don't make as much money and they're not surviving, they're going to stop publishing, and then you got to find someone to publish your article for you. The open access fees, what we call the APC, article processing charge, for a Journal of Shoulder and Elbow Surgery is in the range of about $1,250 for most articles. They can, I think case reports are $750 now. There are journals like Nature and Science where an APC is like over $10,000 to publish an article. The only way you can, realistically publish open access articles with those fees is if it's funded, if you've got the funding from somewhere to do it, because you and I aren't going to publish an article and pay $10,000 to have it published. We don't, you guys, even in academics, you guys don't need your CV to be built up that much. I doubt either of you would pay that. So it's really just a question of how much that the APCs can go up to allow publishers to survive if they go to more and more open access articles.
That's really interesting. I didn't know that. Now tell me, why is the open access fee higher for Nature? I mean, I would think from the journal's perspective that the challenge would be the same. They have to put it online. It has to be available through PubMed. Is that the journal's choice or the publisher's choice that we're charging more because they can charge more?
I think that's it. It's because they can charge more. It's probably a combined discussion between the journal and the publisher both. Although I think Nature at least is self-published. I'd have to look into that. Or no, that's wrong. It's published by Springer. Springer is sort of famous for high fees and high costs and everything like that. So they can charge more because it's Nature. Their impact factor is like 40. Our impact factor is like 3. And the biggest impact factor in orthopedics is now JBJS, and it's about 4.5. So it's such a prestigious journal for scientists to get their articles into that they can charge what they want to almost.
Yeah, Bill, I'm really glad you brought up the APC because there's such wide variability. I'm curious what goes into generating that number. Is that something you'd be willing to share with us? Because it seems so broad.
I can share it with you, but there's not a lot of science to it. It's like we talk to the publisher and they say this is what it should be, what the range should be. We're allowed to make suggestions about it and say like, well, we don't think it should be that high, or or we can say, well, could it be a little higher or something like that? But there's no hard and fast rules on it. It's just what the market will pay. It's just like any other product in the marketplace.
It sounds like a conversation with my wife. Basically, they tell us what to do, and then we undertake it. All right, got it. Block check. I can understand that line of thinking. Peter, are you
Sure.
under the same level of instruction at home?
Well, I mean, I think it's look, Bill, I mean, I appreciate you talking about this because there's not a lot of content available on this. Like, it's hard as an author or reader to know about all these details. And I think they have a real impact on our literature and create systemic biases. And it's fascinating for me to hear that there is no party line. There's no most common fee, and that maybe that fee is not a perfect reflection of the underlying cost, which is, I mean, that it makes perfect sense to me that this is not behave the way that all of economics behaves, and we can't compare different APC fees on Amazon and choose the one with the lowest cost. But I also think that it doesn't really make sense to me that because the journal is more prestigious, they should be allowed to charge more if the underlying thing that they're doing, the service they're providing, is essentially the same.
Yeah, I mean, you can certainly make that argument. On the other hand, as I said, we only publish about 5% of articles that are funded by NIH or Burroughs Wellcome. But Nature and Science publish, a huge number of papers that have significant funding sources, much more than we get in orthopedics. And the authors aren't paying that. It's written into when they apply for a grant for funding, it's written into the grant that any papers that we publish out of this, the APC will be paid for out of our grant monies.
Yeah, but the thing that's interesting about that is that most of those funding sources for grants are from the government. So in a lot of ways, that essentially becomes a tax, right? Like, we've all paid our taxes. Some of those tax dollars have trickled down then back to an APC. And if that APC is not reflective of the actual cost, do you see what I'm saying? Like, that's to me somewhat problematic.
Yeah, I mean, you're getting into, you're talking about trickle down economics and taxes now. We're getting into politics on this, but it is problematic. But as I can tell you, our APC has not changed to any degree since I've been doing this, and it was initially just told to me by Elsevier, said this is what we should charge, and we just said, okay, that's it. There's no science behind it, as I said.
As soon as we start veering in towards politics, I need to take a hard right and we'll go a different direction. The next topic I wanted to really dive in on you is this concept of peer review. Certainly, JSES has led the charge and really leveraged its expert membership as a body of reviewers. We've definitely seen it's probably a little bit more difficult to get those, and especially as you target some of these niche areas. Maybe talk about how that's evolved and where are we going with that?
Yeah, I mean, peer review is critical, and that's the hardest part of my job, and the part I eventually came to like the least about it, because it was just hard. It's hard to get reviewers. A lot of people review. I mean, I can tell you big names that will not review, and I can tell you big names that review all the time. And if we don't get reviewers, the journal doesn't exist, in a peer review status, at least. So, and Brian, you mentioned something that's critical too, and that's like some more esoteric papers, like things like tumors, or now within the last year, I got so many more papers on AI and machine learning and neural networks, and there's just a handful of people I can select from to review for those, and it's difficult because when you only have a handful, you don't want to overburden these people by asking them all the time. So you're kind of stuck. Pediatric elbow injuries. Again, only have a few. When I get papers on anesthesia topics, I don't have real good anesthesia people to review. So the real esoteric subjects are what are really difficult to find reviewers, but we have to find them because otherwise the journals doesn't work.
I think the untold story or the hidden message is that the art of peer review really generates kind of a meritocracy. I know you, as this hidden figure behind the curtain, truly evaluates your reviewers, and those like Peter and others really get elevated. So there is such incredible professional opportunities behind peer review. Not to mention a great opportunity to look critically at the literature and generate new questions, but also learn yourself. So I found it to be a really reciprocal give and take, even though it's additional work outside of your workday. I just want to commend you for building that into the entire organization of the JSES.
Well, I appreciate that, Brian. Thank you. I was never in pure academics. I was in a practice in Durham, affiliated with Duke, sort of a private academics practice. The residents rotated through with us, but I always reviewed for the journal. And I never said no when Bob Neviser asked me to review. And that's how I became an associate editor. Because when he had to pick a new associate editor, he called me because I guess he thought I'd done a good job reviewing. And since I became associate editor, that's how I became editor in chief. And the same thing with Peter. Peter hasn't said this, but Peter's been one of our associate editors now for, I don't know, the last 8-10 years or something like that, Peter. And the reason is when I needed a new associate editor from North America, I went to, people that I knew had reviewed for us and always reviewed and did a good job. And Peter was one of them. I actually picked two from North America at the same time. The other one was a woman you both know, and she's great, named Rachel Frank. And Peter and Rachel started at the same time reviewing for us editing for us. And they did that because they'd both done such a good job reviewing for me. So that's how you move up into different, and that goes back to something, probably the most important piece of advice I received about, getting ahead in the shoulder and elbow world or any subspecialty society. When I was a resident at Duke, I went to an away clinic with John Fagan, who I know both of you know well, or know of well, at least. And, John was telling me, he said, Bill, the way to succeed in these subspecialty societies is pick one society. Don't try and be in all of them and try to do something in every one of them. Just pick the one you're most interested in and focus on that. And that way you can always, you can do the reviews for that journal. You can, be on committees for that subspecialty society. If you're trying to do that in every society, it's too much. And that's what I did. I'm in other societies, AOA and things like that, but the only one I really focused on was ASES. And that's probably why I was able to move up in the society over the years.
What I love about that story is that, you're so humble with all of the contributions you've made to our society. And I think it speaks to, the love that a lot of us have for the society. But what I love about the story is that you did a good job. And then Bob Neviser said, you're doing a good job. How about you be associate editor? And then you're doing a good job. Maybe you want to be editor. And you didn't have to have, it wasn't because like you had an office at the top of the ivory tower. It was because we're like, as a society, that's like kind of one of our shared values is you do a good job and you contribute, and then you can move up the society. So I think it's an amazing story, hope for listeners to hear. The other thing that I wanted to highlight is I think you downplayed in the middle of that just how important and how tireless you were in picking peer reviewers. Like in your story, it's clear just how much thought you were putting into who do I pick to review this article. And that's probably not straightforward. I mean, you have to know everyone in the field to know, oh, this article is going to be best reviewed by this person who has the best knowledge on this specific subject. Because I think all of us who've written articles know that if you get a peer reviewer who doesn't know what you're talking about, you don't get a good review, and then it's unclear if the article should or should not be published. So I think that's something that you've maybe downplayed, but is a hugely important part of all the work you've done.
Well, I appreciate that, Peter. Yeah, I mean, it's part of the job. And I did it differently than some other editors do, like AJSM and JBJS. The reviewers are actually chosen by the associate editors, not the editor-in-chief. And the advantage of that is it offloads the big workload from the editor-in-chief. But the disadvantage is that what you just said, that the associate editors never get to know the reviewers in the depth that I got to know them, because I was picking all of them and seeing what all their reviews were going to be. And the associate editors, there's 20 of them for JSES. So, they do 1/20th the number of papers I do. And they just don't get to know the reviewers as well as I could. So that's a big difference.
And also, I think it says, if you're a member of our society and you get asked to review something, say yes. Often the editor-in-chief has picked you personally as the one who's best suited to do it. So don't say no. I mean, you're the person who really should be reading that. And my experience has been the same as Brian. I mean, I think I've gotten as much out of reviewing and editing as I have out of writing papers and having them published, because you learn so much reading articles.
Yeah, not only do you learn so much just about the topic, you learn how to write papers. You learn, reviewing makes the papers you write better. I actually think if I went back now to, writing papers again, decided I wanted to publish stuff, I bet I could get every paper I write accepted, just because I know exactly what buttons I need to push and exactly what I need to avoid to get these things, because I've seen so many of them. And I bet you both of you, Brian, I think you do it as well as shoulder and elbow. You do it with AJSM too. And Peter, from what you've done as an associate editor, it has to help the way you write your papers and, make sure they're going to get published.
Yeah, it certainly guides the questions that you ask. And for me, I see editors-in-chief as a superhuman masterclass. I mean, the level of humility and just really doing the work without caring who gets credit. I just really have to commend you for that. It's been a great opportunity as a sports medicine surgeon living in occasionally a shoulder elbow land. This is the way I get fed, and it's through the very niche subspecialty topics that come up in your pages. So thanks for playing into that. I was wondering if we could dive into a favorite moment or memory that you have as an editor.
Well, I don't know if I have a favorite memory as an editor for anything that happened by editing. It's just, I said this in San Antonio at the ASES meeting. If people ask me, like, what's the best paper you published, or something like that, I usually say, may not have been the best paper, but I think the most important paper we published in my 16 years was the paper written by Paul Sethi about 12 years ago about using benzoyl peroxide as a skin prep to lower the load of C. acnes, was then called Propionibacterium acnes, on the skin. And it's since been almost proven multiple times that this lowers the load. And we've never proven that this decreases the number of infections, because you guys know in order to do that, you have to have like a a cohort of like 10,000 cases. You can't really do that. But it almost certainly has to, had save people from a lot of morbidity and mortality. I think it's the most important paper we've published in my time. When we were publishing it, I jokingly called it the Clearasil paper, since benzoyl peroxide is the active ingredient in Clearasil. But Paul Sethi deserves a lot of credit for that paper.
Yeah, somewhere in the greater Northeast, Paul Sethi is peacocking around his place. I'm sure proud to have your name or his name on your lips. That's pretty cool. But as a former wrestler, that doesn't surprise me that he would come up with that innovation.
Paul was a wrestler. I didn't know that.
Yeah. But you've certainly had some incredible accomplishments. And I'll probably pass it off to Peter so he can dive in on some of the other questions we had for you.
Now, one thing I wanted to ask you about is there's this new interesting trend. It's the growth of preprint servers like Archive, BioArchive, medRxiv. And the last two are managed through Cold Springs Harbor, but it's a larger trend than just that one institution. And they especially rose problems during the pandemic when there was like COVID research that will be available on these servers before undergoing traditional slower peer review and publication. And people were saying, isn't this great? Haven't we made this progress forward? But the problem, of course, is that not everything that's on those servers then makes it through peer review. Now, my understanding is that actually you can do this with JSCS. You can put your paper on Archive and then submit it to JSCS, and then that happens with a fair number of papers, but not all the papers on those preprint servers. How does this change publishing? How does this change the approach that JSCS that you think will take going forward?
We've talked about this over the years with the editorial staff and with Elsevier as well. We were kind of not really in favor of allowing all our papers to go to medRxiv. I know in physics, our XIV or archive, I guess it's called, almost everything goes there before it gets published. But you're right. During COVID, things were out there all over the place that hadn't been peer reviewed, and the media got a hold of them. I remember seeing an article saying that the big motorcycle rally they have every year in Sturgis, South Dakota, was responsible for 400,000 cases of COVID. And they figured out that by looking at cell phone data. And then I looked at the article, and it was published the day after it was submitted. So it certainly didn't go through any peer review, and stuff like that happens. And when you get something on medRxiv, same thing. I mean, it's out there before anyone's ever looked at it, and then the media can glom onto it and talk about it. Medicine affects people's lives directly more than physics does. I mean, physics obviously affects many things we do behind the scenes, but you're talking about people's health, and when you put something on medRxiv that may not really have much science behind it, but it looks like it does because it's out there, that can affect people. And that's why we sort of said we're not really super in favor of it. We've sort of given in a little bit. We will accept papers that have been put on there, although I don't really still like the idea, but it's probably the way it's going to go. I mean, probably down the road, everything will go on there first before it gets published. And, it's one of those things, you can't really stop it.
Well, to say that you're a man of versatile talents, I think is to put it mildly. You have a dedicated Wikipedia page. You're a professional golfer and have been. You're an Olympic historian, practicing surgeon for many years right down the road in Durham, North Carolina. I'm wondering, of all of these, do you have a professional accomplishment that you're most proud of, whether that's in or outside of medicine?
Well, probably the thing I'm most proud of is I became president of American Shoulder and Elbow Surgeons. I never thought that would happen when I started doing this, really, because I thought it would be someone who was only in purely academics, but they did pick me. And I'm proud of what I did as editor of the journal. Outside of that, going to my hobbies, I back around 2004, I think it was, the International Olympic Committee gave me the highest honor they give someone outside of the Olympic athletes, called the Olympic Order. I received the Olympic Order in silver. It's actually hanging on the wall behind me right now. And so I'm kind of proud of that. Yeah. You said I was a professional golfer, and I think you should emphasize I was. I haven't played golf in years now. I did that for 5 years back in the 1970s, what seems almost like a different lifetime ago.
Well, it's still the same. I think you could still count it, but I do think your story, I was a professional guy, makes me laugh. The certainly a lot of contributions to mention there, a lot to be proud of. Your story is so unique, and so I think you've learned a lot along the way. Do you have any parting words of wisdom for the members of the society? As like for all the people that listen, what do you wish you'd known? If you could go back and tell that 1970s professional golfer, this is what you should know now for all you're going to experience in the future.
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. I think I would say don't be so hard on yourself. I was hard on myself when I played golf as a professional. I know other people who would never blame themselves. They say, "Oh, I got a bad break." And to me, it was always, no, I didn't hit the shot the way I should, And when I had a complication in surgery, I was the same way. I mean, it just killed me, things happen, and you have to understand that they're going to happen. We hate complications because it affects the patient so much. It makes you look bad. But, guys like you and, people who have been so well trained and do a good job, I mean, you're still going to have complications. You just have to learn to accept them and not get down on yourself about it, and try to, rise above that. But, that's hard. They bothered me to the very end. One of the last patients I had in practice was a total shoulder, the guy had come to see me from a long way away. And I did an uncemented glenoid on him with these new magical things. And on the first post-op visit, the glenoid had come out of the, glenoid face. I had to take him back the next day to put a new glenoid in, which I cemented. And, I felt terrible. And that was one of my last cases in practice. So I never got completely over it, but I'd urge people to try and not be too hard on yourself.
Well, certainly, I think those are parting words that give yourself some slack, but at the same time, maybe, like when things go wrong, don't take it personally that you're a bad person. Instead, say, what could I do differently next time? Because maybe I'm not, it's not a reflection on you as a person. You're a bad person. So I think that's good advice. Certainly, I think many of our listeners are going to have trouble taking it. It's hard. It's so hard to actually think that in the moment when things are going wrong.
Exactly. It really is. But, we're human beings. You look at guys like a Peter Chalmers and a Brian Waterman, eminently well-trained, best medical schools. Well, no, neither one of you guys went to Duke. I'm sorry, but
That's fired.
Yeah, great residency programs, great fellowship, and you do a good job, and you just need to remember that.
I think the important thing that editors do for us too is it offers us a tangible example of role models, and in a sense, you've been able to be a mentor to countless individuals, from your peer reviewers and your authors, and so to hear you talk about your lessons learned and what you would pass along, I think it's important and timely. You're alluding to this sense of grit and resiliency, and being able to manage that negative feedback, whether that's a complication or an area where you haven't met your mark. So I appreciate you saying that. message received. I think we could all work on that a little bit further.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, we are certainly excited to have had you on. It's been an incredible career, and on behalf of Peter and I just really want to thank you for taking the time and investing so much in this community. I can tell you have two avid followers in Peter and I.
Well, I appreciate that, guys. You guys have both done a great job with the Shoulder and Elbow Society, and also Brian with you in the sports medicine, AOSSM. So keep it up.
Fantastic. Well, that's about all the time we have for the podcast. Thank you so much to Bill Mallon as our honored guest. For all our Shoulder and Elbow listeners out there, please don't forget to subscribe. And for Peter Chalmers, I'm Brian Waterman. We will catch up with you next time. Thank you.